The birthday party was in full swing, with vibrant balloons adorning the living room and the mouth-watering aroma of Mom's famous lasagna wafting through the air. Laughter and chatter filled the space as my family members mingled, celebrating my niece Olivia's first birthday. As I scanned the room, my eyes landed on Marcus, my husband of 6 years, engaged in an animated conversation with my brother Theo. Clearing my throat, I clinked my glass, silencing the room. All eyes turned towards me, and I felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate Olivia's special day," I began, my voice steady despite the turmoil brewing within me. "However, there's something I need to address." I reached into my purse and pulled out a manila envelope, my fingers trembling slightly. Taking a deep breath, I handed the envelope to Marcus, who eyed it quizzically. "Those are divorce papers," I declared, my words slicing through the stunned silence like a knife. Marcus's face drained of color as he stared at me, his mouth agape. The room erupted into a cacophony of gasps and murmurs, but I stood firm, my resolve unwavering. "Evelyn, what's going on?" Theo asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I turned to him, my gaze steely. "Marcus has been having an affair with our sister Lila." The room fell deathly silent, the weight of my words hanging heavy in the air. Theo's eyes widened in disbelief, while my parents exchanged bewildered glances. "That's ridiculous," Marcus exclaimed, his voice tinged with desperation. "Evelyn, you're overreacting." I shook my head, unflinching. "I wish I were, Marcus, but the evidence is undeniable." I gestured towards the envelope in his hands. "You'll find all the proof you need in there." Theo stepped forward, his face etched with a mixture of anger and disgust. "Is this true, Marcus?" Marcus remained silent, his eyes darting around the room, searching for an escape. But there was none. The truth had been laid bare, and the consequences were inescapable. As the room descended into chaos, with accusations and denials flying from every direction, I stood resolute, my heart heavy but my mind clear. This was the first step towards reclaiming my life, and I would face the fallout head-on, no matter how painful it might be. The deafening silence that followed my revelation was shattered by a cacophony of voices, each person reacting in their own way. Mom burst into tears, her face buried in her hands, while Dad paced back and forth, his expression a mixture of disbelief and fury. "How could you do this to our family?" Theo bellowed, his fists clenched at his sides. "To your own sister." Marcus remained motionless, his eyes downcast, the divorce papers crumpled in his hand. Theo strode over to him, his face contorted with rage. "Answer me, you coward!" he shouted, grabbing Marcus by the collar. "Theo, stop!" I cried, stepping between them. "Violence won't solve anything." Theo reluctantly released his grip, his chest heaving with each breath. "He deserves far worse than that," he spat. I turned to Marcus, my heart pounding in my ears. "Well, don't you have anything to say for yourself?" Marcus slowly lifted his gaze, his eyes devoid of any remorse. "It wasn't supposed to happen this way," he muttered, his voice barely audible. "Wasn't supposed to happen?" I echoed incredulously. "You betrayed me, Marcus. You betrayed all of us." "I never meant to hurt you," he said, his tone almost pleading. "But you did," I retorted, my voice laced with venom. "And not just me, our entire family." "Where is Lila, anyway?" Aunt Melissa chimed in, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "Isn't it a bit odd that she's not here for her own daughter's birthday?" A collective murmur rippled through the room as everyone realized the truth behind her absence. Marcus visibly tensed, his hands clenching into fists. "That's enough," he growled, his eyes darting around the room. "I'm not going to stand here and be accused like this." "Accused?" I scoffed. "I have proof, Marcus. Irrefutable proof of your lies and deceit." I retrieved the envelope from the floor, pulling out a stack of printed emails and text messages. With trembling hands, I began reading them aloud, each word searing into the hearts of those present. As the damning evidence mounted, Marcus's facade began to crumble, his shoulders slumping in defeat. Theo's suspicions had been confirmed, and the rest of the family was forced to confront the harsh reality of the situation. When the last message had been read, a deafening silence hung in the air, punctuated only by the occasional sniffle or choked sob. Marcus stood motionless, a broken man, while the rest of us struggled to process the depths of his betrayal. In that moment, the lines were drawn, those who stood by me and those who couldn't bring themselves to believe the truth. But no matter which side they chose, One thing was clear. Our family would never be the same again. The air was thick with tension, the revelations of Marcus's betrayal hanging over us like a oppressive cloud. As the shock began to dissipate, anger and disbelief took its place, with family members hurling accusations and demands for explanations. "How could you stoop so low?" Uncle Rick spat, his face flushed with rage. "Your own sister-in-law?" Marcus remained silent, his gaze fixed on the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. It was as if he had been reduced to a mere shell of a man, his carefully constructed facade crumbling under the weight of his deceit. "I can't believe this," Aunt Melissa muttered, shaking her head in disgust. "And where the hell is Lila? She should be here, facing the consequences of her actions." A hush fell over the room as everyone realized the significance of Lila's absence. It was her daughter's first birthday, a milestone that any loving mother would have moved mountains to be present for. Yet she was nowhere to be found, adding another layer of suspicion to an already volatile situation. "You know, now that I think about it, Lila has been acting strange ever since she got back from that business trip a few months ago," Theo piped up, his brow furrowed in contemplation. "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Theo turned to me, his expression grave. "She's been distant, distracted, constantly glued to her phone, taking calls in private. At first, I just chalked it up to work stress, but now—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear. Lila's erratic behavior, her conspicuous absence, it all pointed to one inescapable truth. She had been carrying on an affair with Marcus, right under our noses. "You disgust me," I spat, rounding on Marcus with a newfound fury. "Not only did you betray me, but you also betrayed our entire family. And for what? A cheap thrill?" Marcus flinched as if I had struck him, but he remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. "Say something, you coward!" Theo roared, his patience wearing thin. Finally, Marcus lifted his head, his eyes hollow and devoid of emotion. "What do you want me to say?" he muttered, his voice laced with defeat. "That I'm sorry, that I never meant for any of this to happen? Spare us your pathetic excuses," I hissed. "You made your choices, and now you have to face the consequences." As the accusations and condemnations continued to rain down upon him, Marcus retreated further into himself, a broken and pathetic figure. But in that moment, I felt no pity, only a burning desire for justice and retribution. The battle lines had been drawn, and as I surveyed the room, it became clear that the majority of my family stood by my side. Marcus and Lila had not only betrayed our trust, but they had also shattered the sacred bonds of family. And for that, they would pay dearly. As the tension in the room reached a fever pitch, I found myself unable to remain silent any longer. The weight of Marcus and Lila's betrayal threatened to crush me, but I refused to let it break my spirit. "You want to know the truth?" I said, my voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. "The whole sordid truth?" All eyes turned towards me, a hush falling over the room as everyone waited with bated breath. "Marcus has been having an affair with Lila," I stated, the words leaving a bitter taste in my mouth. "My own husband and my sister, sneaking around behind my back like a pair of teenagers." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, with some expressing shock while others nodded grimly, as if they had suspected as much all along. "That's a lie!" Marcus cried, his face contorted with rage. "How dare you accuse me of such a thing?" "Save your denials," I spat, my hands balling into fists. "I have proof, emails, text messages, the whole sordid trail of your deceit." Marcus opened his mouth to protest, but I held up a hand, silencing him. "Don't even try to wriggle your way out of this," I warned. "The evidence is irrefutable." Turning to the rest of the family, I saw a mixture of emotions playing across their faces. Disbelief, anger, and in some cases, a hint of betrayal. "I know it's hard to believe," I said, my voice softening ever so slightly. "Believe me, I never wanted to accept it either, but the truth is right here, staring us in the face." I pulled out a stack of printed emails and text messages, the damning proof of Marcus and Lila's affair. "Read them for yourselves," I said, handing the stack to Theo. "See the lies they've been spinning, the way they mocked our trust and our family." As Theo began reading aloud, the atmosphere in the room grew increasingly tense. With each incriminating message, Marcus seemed to shrink further into himself, his bravado crumbling under the weight of the evidence. "How could you, Marcus?" Mom sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "How could you do this to our family?" Marcus remained silent, his eyes downcast, unable to meet anyone's gaze. "And Lila," Dad growled, his fists clenched at his sides. "Our own flesh and blood, betraying us like this." The room erupted into a cacophony of shouting and accusations, with family members taking sides and hurling insults at Marcus and the absent Lila. In the midst of the chaos, I stood tall, my resolve unwavering. As the dust settled and the initial shock gave way to anger and hurt, it became clear that the majority of the family had turned against Marcus and Lila. Their actions had not only shattered the bonds of trust within our family, but they had also challenged the very foundations of our values and beliefs. And as I looked around at the faces of those who had chosen to stand by me, I knew that Marcus and Lila would face the full force of our collective wrath. They may have thought they could get away with their sordid affair, but they had severely underestimated the strength and resilience of our family. The battle lines had been drawn, and there was no turning back. Marcus and Lila would pay for their betrayal, no matter the cost. The air was thick with tension, the weight of the revelations hanging over us like an oppressive cloud. Marcus had been exposed, his sordid affair with Lila laid bare for all to see, and yet he remained defiant, his jaw clenched and his eyes burning with a mixture of anger and desperation. "You can't seriously believe this nonsense," he spat, gesturing wildly at the stack of printed emails and text messages. "Evelyn is clearly grasping at straws, trying to paint me as the villain in some twisted attempt to justify her own insecurities." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the crowd, but before anyone could respond, I stepped forward, my hands trembling with barely contained fury. "Insecurities?" I echoed, my voice dripping with disdain. "Is that what you think this is about? You're nothing but a liar and a cheat, Marcus, and these messages prove it." I snatched the stack of papers from Theo's hands and began reading aloud, each word a damning indictment of Marcus and Lila's betrayal. "Can't wait to see you tonight, babe. Tell Evelyn you're working late," I recited, my voice trembling with emotion. "Does that sound like an innocent exchange to you?" Marcus flinched as if I had struck him, but I pressed on, delving deeper into the sordid trail of deceit. "I miss the taste of your lips, the feel of your skin against mine," I continued, my stomach churning with every word. "How romantic, Marcus. Truly poetic." The room had fallen deathly silent, the weight of the evidence hanging heavy in the air. I turned to face Marcus, my eyes blazing with righteous fury. "Still want to deny it?" I challenged, holding up the stack of messages. "Or do you need me to read more of your steamy love notes?" Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room, his gaze landing on each stunned face, searching for any shred of support or sympathy. But there was none to be found. The proof was undeniable, and the walls were closing in. "You're a disgrace," Uncle Rick spat, his face contorted with disgust. "To think we welcomed you into this family with open arms, and this is how you repay us?" "Lila is just as guilty," Aunt Melissa chimed in, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. "My own sister, carrying on an affair with my brother-in-law. It's sickening." The condemnations continued to rain down, each family member taking turns expressing their anger and disappointment. And through it all, Marcus remained silent, his head bowed in defeat. As the chaos swirled around us, I stood tall, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over me. The truth had been laid bare, and Marcus and Lila's deceit had been exposed for all to see. They had thought they could betray us, mock our trust, and walk away unscathed. But they had underestimated the strength of our family bonds, and now they would face the consequences of their actions. The battle had been fought, and we had emerged victorious. But as I looked around at the shattered remnants of our once happy family, I knew that the road to healing would be long and arduous. Marcus and Lila had inflicted deep wounds, and the scars would never truly fade. But for now, in this moment, I allowed myself to savor the sweet taste of justice, a small victory in the face of overwhelming betrayal. The weight of the evidence was crushing, the damning messages and emails laying bare the sordid details of Marcus and Lila's affair. As the shock and anger rippled through the room, Marcus seemed to shrink before our eyes, his bravado crumbling under the force of our collective outrage. "Well," Theo growled, his face flushed with fury, Don't you have anything to say for yourself, you sorry excuse for a man? Marcus opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked around the room, his eyes pleading for understanding, but he found none, only a sea of disgust and betrayal. Suddenly, Theo's phone buzzed, and he glanced down at the screen. His brow furrowed, and a look of grim satisfaction spread across his face. "What is it?" I asked, my heart pounding in my chest. Theo turned to Marcus, his mouth curled into a sneer. "I just got a text from your buddy, Jason. He says he has some interesting net photos and videos of you and Lila that he's more than happy to share with the family." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd, and Marcus visibly paled, his eyes wide with panic. "Don't you dare," he hissed, his voice laced with desperation. But it was too late. Theo began scrolling through his phone, and a series of intimate photos and videos flashed across the screen, each one more damning than the last. The room erupted into a cacophony of outraged cries and accusations, with family members recoiling in horror at the graphic evidence of Marcus and Lila's betrayal. "How could you?" Mom sobbed, her face buried in her hands. "My own son-in-law, my own daughter. This is too much." Marcus looked around wildly, his eyes darting from one accusing face to the next. Finally, his gaze settled on me, and in that moment, something seemed to break inside him. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the din. "I never meant for any of this to happen." "Save your excuses," I spat, my voice dripping with venom. "You made your choices, and now you have to live with the consequences." Marcus seemed to deflate, the fight draining out of him as the weight of his actions bore down upon him. He sank to his knees, his head bowed in shame, a broken and pathetic figure. "Get out," Theo growled, his face contorted with rage. "You're not welcome here anymore. You lying, cheating scumbag." Marcus didn't protest, didn't even attempt to defend himself. He simply nodded, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and slowly made his way towards the door. As he reached for the handle, I called out to him one last time. "I hope it was worth it," I said, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. "Because you've lost everything, your family, your dignity, your self-respect, all for a cheap affair with my sister." Marcus turned to face me, his eyes haunted and hollow. For a moment he seemed to struggle with his words, but in the end he simply nodded and slipped out the door, disappearing into the night. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of what had just transpired hanging heavy in the air. As I looked around at the shattered faces of my family members, I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult. The bonds of trust had been irreparably broken, and the pain of Marcus and Lila's betrayal would linger like an open wound. But in that moment, I felt a sense of grim satisfaction. The truth had been laid bare, and justice had been served, no matter how bitter and painful it may have been. The aftermath of Marcus's confession was like a nuclear fallout, the shockwaves rippling through our family and leaving a path of devastation in their wake. As the dust settled, the true extent of the damage became painfully clear, with fractures and fault lines emerging among those who had once been so close. In the days that followed, Lila finally resurfaced, her face ashen and her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She showed up on my doorstep, a pitiful sight, begging for forgiveness and understanding. "Evelyn, please," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "You have to believe me. I never meant for any of this to happen. It just happened." I stared at her, my heart hardening with each passing moment. "It just happened," I echoed, my voice laced with disdain. "You betrayed me, Lila. You betrayed our entire family. And for what? A cheap fling with my husband?" Lila flinched as if I had struck her, her eyes welling with tears. "It wasn't like that," she insisted. "Marcus and we fell in love. It wasn't just physical." I couldn't help but scoff at her words, the bitterness and anger welling up inside me like a tidal wave. "Love?" I spat. "You call that love? Sneaking around behind my back, lying to everyone you claim to care about? That's not love, Lila. That's a betrayal of the highest order." Lila broke down then, her sobs echoing through the empty hallway. "I'm so sorry." She choked out between gasps for air. "I never wanted to hurt you like this. Please, you have to forgive me." For a moment I felt a flicker of pity for her, this broken shell of a woman who had once been my closest confidante. But then I remembered the pain, the humiliation, the utter devastation of having my life torn apart by the people I trusted most, and the anger came flooding back. "Forgive you?" I said, my voice low and steady. After what you did, after you betrayed me in the worst possible way? Not a chance. Lila's eyes widened, her mouth hanging open in shock. But we're sisters, she stammered. Family. Doesn't that mean anything to you? I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Family? I echoed. You lost the right to call me that the moment you decided to sleep with my husband. Lila recoiled as if I had struck her, her face crumpling in agony. Please, Evelyn, she begged. I'll do anything. Just give me a chance to make things right. But I had heard enough. I stepped back, closing the door in her face, shutting out her pleas and her tears. In that moment, I knew that there was no going back, no way to repair the damage that had been done. As the days turned into weeks, the rift within our family only seemed to widen. Marcus and Lila were ostracized, shunned by those who had once embraced them as their own. They became pariahs, outcasts in their own lives, forced to confront the harsh reality of their actions. And through it all, I stood tall, refusing to back down or show any sign of weakness. I had been betrayed in the worst possible way, but I refused to let it break me. Instead, I channeled my anger and pain into rebuilding my life, piece by shattered piece. As I looked ahead to the future, I knew that the road would be long and arduous. The wounds inflicted by Marcus and Lila would never fully heal, and the scars they left behind would be a constant reminder of the price we had paid for their selfish actions. But in that moment, I made a silent vow to myself. I would not let their betrayal define me. I would rise from the ashes of their deceit, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And when the dust finally settled, I would emerge victorious, a testament to the indomitable strength of the human spirit. Months passed, and the dust began to settle on the aftermath of Marcus and Lila's betrayal. As I navigated the rocky terrain of my new reality, I couldn't help but take stock of the consequences they had faced for their actions. Marcus had been well and truly ostracized from our family, a pariah in his own life. His once thriving business crumbled as clients and colleagues alike turned their backs on him, unwilling to associate with someone of such dubious moral character. He was forced to sell his beloved sports car and downsize to a cramped apartment on the outskirts of town, a far cry from the lavish lifestyle he had once enjoyed. Lila, too, had suffered immensely. Her once promising career in marketing came to a screeching halt as word of her indiscretion spread like wildfire. Doors that had once been open to her were slammed shut, and she found herself struggling to make ends meet, reduced to working menial jobs just to keep a roof over her head. But perhaps the most devastating blow of all was the loss of respect and trust from those who had once loved and admired them. Our family, once so close-knit and supportive, had been torn asunder by their selfish actions, with fractures and fault lines emerging that would likely never fully heal. As for me, I had channeled my anger and pain into rebuilding my life, brick by painstaking brick. I threw myself into my work, pouring every ounce of my energy into advancing my career and proving to the world and to myself that I was more than just a victim of circumstance. And it paid off. Within a year, I had been promoted to a senior management position, a testament to my dedication and unwavering determination. I moved into a sleek, modern apartment in the heart of the city, surrounding myself with the finer things in life, a stark contrast to the humble existence Marcus and Lila had been relegated to. But even as I achieved success after success, there was a part of me that remained haunted by the ghost of their betrayal. The wounds they had inflicted ran deep, and no amount of professional accomplishment could fully erase the scars they had left behind. It was during one of my rare moments of introspection that the realization hit me. Marcus and Lila had been the architects of their own downfall. Their selfish desires, their blatant disregard for the bonds of family and trust, had ultimately led them down a path of ruin and disgrace. And in that moment, I felt a surge of vindication, a sense of justice being served. They had thought they could get away with their sordid affair, that their love would conquer all. But in the end, they had been the ones to pay the ultimate price, their lives torn asunder by the very actions they had once thought were justified. As I looked back on the events that had forever changed the course of my life, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride in the person I had become. I had emerged from the ashes of their betrayal like a phoenix, stronger and more resilient than ever before. And as for Marcus and Lila, they had become little more than cautionary tales, living reminders of the consequences of selfishness and deceit. Their names were whispered in hushed tones, their stories serving as a warning to those who might be tempted to follow in their footsteps. In the end, the karma they had sown had come full circle, and they were left to reap the bitter harvest of their actions. And though the pain of their betrayal would never fully fade, I took solace in knowing that justice had been served, and that I had emerged victorious in the face of overwhelming adversity.